Hi, I'm Rick Morley and you might know me as BrainFizz. My company deals exclusively with the restoration of historic vintage windows and doors, mostly sash windows but also casements. I take old, neglected, rotten and unloved windows that might not be working, might be broken, and I restore them back to more or less new condition. This is Make Space in Cambridge, which is a community-based workshop area that was set up about 12 years ago now in a building owned by Cambridge University. 3,500 square feet of enormous workshop space, and I can come here as a member and do the projects that are just a little bit too big for my own workshop. So all the tools we're using today have been provided by Toolstation, and they are available either online, in store, or for next day collection. So a couple of the features that I really like about this. First one is the fact that the base configuration allows me to put a guide bush on the bottom, which means I can have all my own homemade jigs specific to certain tasks of joinery. Works perfectly for that. The cutter capacity is really good as well, so I can swap out between very delicate tasks to maybe hogging out large flat areas, something like that, as well as profiling. Depth of plunge is really handy because I always lose a certain amount through the thickness of the jigs that I make. So it's a good compromise between a good sturdy jig and still being able to use it with the depth of plunge. And the fine adjustment on here. The fact that I can fine tune that for really delicate depths and accuracy on there, really, really good. I think it's got possibly the best collet system of this type of router that I've come across. One thing that makes a big difference for me when I'm using this base plate on the router is this extended plate. But the extended base on there means I can work on quite narrow timber in relative confidence and safety. Looking at the Biscuit jointer, I really like using this Biscuit jointer on site being cordless. It's heavy enough that it feels safe and secure, but it's light enough that it still feels safe in the hand. For me personally, in this environment, I tend to use it for removing the nose of, say, a rotten windowsill, where I can take the reference plate on the front against the windowsill or the back plate against the window edge, and then by plunging down consecutively, I can create a good, neat start to removing that rotten sill. Really, really handy for that, and being cordless, obviously I can work at height as well, which is great. I love the dust extractor bag on this. It works perfectly for being outside. Biscuit joints tend to make a lot of dust and a lot of mess. The blade gives a good, nice, clean cut, and there's plenty of adjustment both in the angle and the height of where it's cutting. Yes, good tool, I like this. So I really do like the miter saw in terms of its size. For me and the work I do, it's got enough capacity to cope with even quite large door frames, gate posts, but it's small enough that I can do the more intricate cuts for things like half laps and joinery grade stuff with the windows, cutting repaired components and things like that. It's nice and portable, so it doesn't take up too much room in the van. It's light so that I can get it up onto a scaffold, or I can maneuver it into tight spaces if I'm working in a confined environment, which does happen a lot in old houses, as you might think. There's a good variety of blades, so if I'm using resin work for repairs, I can cut plastic and perspex shuttering, or just all I need to do is put a finer tooth blade, like the 60 tooth blade that's available. Generally I keep a 48 tooth in it. Compact, but it's also very adaptable. You get a lot of kind of punch for this weight category. I've always used the trend saw blades because they are probably about the best value when you add in their availability. They're easy to get hold of wherever I happen to be, but for a good price, and you get longevity out of the blade as well. So it's a nice little kind of win-win-win for those with the saw blades. Big fan of those. So what I really like about this range of blades is they cut efficiently. They last a long time. You can see the blade that I'm using at the moment is old and dirty because it's made a lot of cuts, and that lets me make money from its use, but it doesn't cost the earth. The three parts together make for a very economical product. Another plus point for me personally with this range of blades is they're easy to get hold of in multiple stores. If I'm working across the country, as I generally am, I can go to somewhere like Toolstation and they've got the blade that I need, not just for the miter saw or my circular saw, but my whole range of tools that I need a blade for, whether it be a table saw or one of the circular saws or whatever it is. Being able to get something at short notice, really, really handy. These are great up a ladder in an inaccessible place, outside, where I don't want to be tethered to a cord on the mains or, to be honest, an extractor either. So they're great for that. They do the job absolutely flawlessly in terms of the finish I can get and in the area that I'm using. They're not too noisy. Sometimes sanders are really noisy and sometimes they're really, you get like tingling in your hands. And I've got to use this for quite a while before I get that tingly sensation, which is inevitable holding something that's vibrating. All in all, I love it. The marrying up of a battery with a sander and then the abrasives, perfect for me, for what I need, absolutely love it. The features that I do like about this saw is firstly the hook. When I'm out on site, I usually set up some trestles and just being able to hook that over the edge of the bench and walk away and know exactly where it is actually really handy. The laser is a good reference point for cutting when you're setting up a cut to get the blade much closer to cut line. The laser is a really good reference point. I cut a lot of bevels for the bottom of windows and doors. If I want to get like a drip, then the bevel on the bottom that does work quite well, and when I'm cutting windowsills and things like that. Build quality is really good. Aluminium, a lot of saws I've noticed these days have got a lot of plastic to them. This is a lot of aluminium, so it's got the weight and the robustness without too much of the kind of downside of the increased weight. But yeah, it's good solid build, and the depth is very easy to adjust, and it clamps very securely with virtually zero effort on the lever, which is a good thing if you're trying to get a precise depth of cut, which obviously I do quite a bit of. I do like these batteries. I don't see many these days that are vented. Most brands seem to be just encased, but these have actually got little vents in them, so when the battery is charging, when you really want it to keep cool, the air gets drawn in through the fan on the charger and keeps the cells as cool as they're needed. So yeah, that's a good point with those. I'm going to use a 2 amp battery on the miter saw. Batteries come as 2 amp, 4 amp and 5 amp. Obviously they're all interchangeable. I just generally use the 2 on the miter saw because I make lots of little cuts rather than, I don't need necessarily the longevity with that tool. I try and save that for the router, which I'm using for a bit longer. So one trend tool that's never usually too far away from me is a dust mask. Because I'm working with old windows, old materials, lead paint, rotten timber, dust, all that sort of stuff. Nasty things get in the air a lot. I do like wearing the trend stealth mask. Big features for me, one, probably the most important personally, is comfort. Because it's comfortable, I do wear it. I don't worry about how I've got to wear it for long periods of time because it's always comfortable. Generally I put it on, I haven't got to think about, I've got a mask on, it's just there and it's doing its thing. In line with the restoration of the old windows and keeping things in circulation, I love the fact that I can remove the filters, I can wash the mask, I can maintain it. I haven't got to buy a new mask when it starts to kind of not work and be thrown away and have a new one. I just have to change the filters periodically. I generally change the filters if I can smell something nasty, or if it becomes difficult to breathe, or if I've been doing a lot of really heavy routing and nasty dust production. That's when it's the time for me to change the filters. And there are also different sorts of filters for different applications. So if I'm grinding or brushing hardware that's got old paint on it, or a lot of grime and dust and there's metal in the air, I can use one filter, and if it's wood and timber and nasty things like that, then I'll use another sort of filter. If I'm routing with MDF making templates, it's perfect for MDF, and it comes at a good price longevity wise because I've only got to replace filters, so it fits the pocket as well as the face really, really well. So I joined MakeSpace early 2020, and before that I've always been into woodworking. I used to do a lot of second fix carpentry, so skirting boards, hanging doors and floors and that kind of thing, the odd kitchen fit. And in more recent years, bizarrely, these things happen. It wasn't something I intended to do, but the business sort of shifted into period restorations and sash windows and old historic homes. And that's what I've been doing now for the last 4 years, solely full time. A few years ago now, I started up a YouTube channel because it was kind of the cool thing to do then. It was a good way to promote the business, but also it meant during the slower periods of the year, I could be still busy doing things, and it would be a sort of a trickle stream of revenue for when I was busy and didn't have time to do it. So although I've never really committed full-time 100% to one thing or another, there's a bit of a back catalogue, and I used to video a lot of the projects and do some how-tos and videos like that to help people out that were either learning or DIYing or just were bored. That was when my social media life started. Now I'm purely, well, in more recent years, because I've been so busy and haven't had the time to do the editing side of it, I tend to concentrate more on the Instagram, which means I get to push out more information to people, show people more of what I'm doing, but I don't have to spend so much input in doing the editing and things like that. So that's where I'm mostly active. So I think I started maybe in 2006 with my first trend products. And I remember a guy I knew at the time, he happened to be a carpenter, he was my neighbour, and we were talking about a particular thing that I wanted to do, and he said, get a trend router and the trend cutters and go and look through their catalogue and get lost with all the things. There'll be a cutter in there that will be the whatever it was. And I remember exactly where I was and the time. I can still remember that kind of conversation in my head. And from that day on, almost exclusively trend have been my router, routing and cutter supplier. Yeah, I think 2006 was about the time. So a little while now. It's quite scary when you think of going back that far. Crikey. The first tool I bought was a T4 with a selection box of cutters. And then from that progressed to a small router table. I remember buying the CRT router table almost on the day it was launched, as soon as it came out. That then got upgraded with a T11 router, which is still in use today, I'll add. The cordless tools more recently I've been using, but also saw blades. I've always used the trend saw blades because they are probably about the best value when you add in their availability. They're easy to get hold of wherever I happen to be, but for a good price, and you get longevity out of the blade as well. So it's a nice little kind of win-win-win for those with the saw blades. Big fan of those. I get asked a lot, what is my favourite product, by followers on Instagram, messages on YouTube and people in person. And half of me wants to say the router. I use this a lot. It's really, really handy. A lot of the tasks that I need to do for cutting mouldings or joinery and things like that, it's really useful for that. But I don't always use it. The tool I use the absolute most, I'm going to pick as my favourite, is the miter saw. I use it all the time for cutting blanks, cutting repair splices for windows, cutting new components, all kinds of half laps, miters, bevels, absolutely everything. And maybe even things that are possibly not designed for, or the best tool for, but the portability where I've always got it, it's always there. I can hoik it up a set of stairs, no bother at all. I can put it on a scaffold, I can put it in the back of my van and cut with it, or on a stack of toolboxes, anything like that. It just is a little companion that's there So that's absolutely my favourite tool. It's small, but it's got a lot of features and a lot of capacity, which I really, really like. I absolutely love it. Really good tool. What I've got here is a piece of English oak. This tree actually grew in the grounds of Boughton House and was milled by their own sawmill, which is where I get most of my hardwood timber, native supply. The reason I'm putting oak in is because the original sill that was placed in this window set back in 1915 was made of oak. So I replaced like for like. Now these two parts are portions of the original sill that you can see as rotted out. The reason I keep these is because I can, essentially in sort of almost like a forensic or archaeological side, is I can work out from these bits of timber the profile that I need to make this blank. So I've got my dimensions from the original sill being the same height, and I know from measuring the window aperture the depth that I need, which is 6 inches. So this will give me my profile, and what I've done is I've taken, just using a bit of cardboard packaging, the angles and profile that I need for the sill, including this little cutout for part of the casing. What I always keep in mind is I'm part of the story of that window. You know, it doesn't become my window, I become part of its history. It's kind of a weird sort of way to look at it perhaps, but I always try and put that window back how I found it or how it was left by the person that made it. It's nice to be able to think that by the time I finish with this window, it can be almost forgotten about until the next guy has to come along in 40, 50, 60, however many years. So it's nice to become part of the story of the window and hence the property as well. But you know, I'm one of those sad people, I just like old things. I've always liked the industrial revolution sort of era and that kind of steam-powered industrial age. And this to me is marrying up a passion for wood with a passion for that era. Because you know, when people made these windows, they made them properly and with care, and they overmade. You know, we all say, oh, they don't make them like they used to. I like to be part of that when they did make them, be proud of what was made and be able to stand back and go, yeah, I'm glad about that, rather than just moving on to another job.